Welcome all to this webinar today on climate justice in the classroom, empowering students as agents of change. We've got a fantastic event lined up for you today with speakers Bill Finnegan, who is Sustainability Education and Research Manager at the University of Oxford, Isabel Talks, who's a postdoctoral researcher, lecturer and consultant with the Department of Education at the University of Oxford, and Justin Dillon, who's Professor of Science and Environmental Education at University College of London. I'm Joe Bullough, Engagement and Partnerships Lead at the Department of Education at the University of Oxford. It's a real pleasure to be able to introduce this event to you. This event is brought to you by the Oxford Education Deanery. We are, in a sense, have become the Department of Education at the University of Oxford's Policy and Practice Hub. As part of that, we have a mission to empower education practitioners and policy professionals worldwide to understand, use, and co-produce high-quality research evidence in education. And so as such, we aim to facilitate a two-way conduit between Oxford's researchers and the stakeholders for which the research is done, in whose name. And it offers a mechanism to support professional learning and research engagement across all those audiences. So it's a pleasure to welcome you to this event. At the end, we are going to share a feedback form to get a sense of how you thought the event went and if it's been really useful for your work here. But without further ado, I'd like to, at this point, pass over to Bill Finnegan and Isabel Talks to begin the event. Thank you very much for joining today.
Great. Thank you very much, Joe. And thanks everyone for joining. And because you just gave us a very nice introduction, actually, I don't think the three of us need to introduce ourselves, but I will provide a bit of background about the partners and the context of this session. And then Justin will actually step in and tell us a little bit more about the motivation of the report we're going to talk about, and then we'll pass it over to Isabel to go into more depth. So as Joe mentioned, I'm based at the University of Oxford, and we have been hosting this week a summit on climate change and human rights, which is the Right Here, Right Now Global Climate Summit. And we've had a series of events across the university, a whole local program of events, looking at different aspects of this question of essentially climate justice. So human rights and climate change can mean very specific things to a lawyer, but to the rest of us, it's about kind of understanding what it means to be a human in this time of change and transition, what it means to look for opportunities to take action around climate change. What does it mean to cut across different academic disciplines, different school subjects? I should also mention that this event, well, this webinar is also being presented by the Education and Training for the Climate Hub in the Department of Education, and also Justin will mention, of course, the two other partners, the UCL Centre for Climate Sustainability Education and also the National Association for Environmental Education. So it's brilliant to be with you on World Environment Day, and it's brilliant to be with you as part of the Right Here, Right Now Summit to be talking about these themes of how we tackle climate change in the classroom in a really creative and effective and empowering way. And with that, I will pass it over to Justin.
Thank you, Bill, and welcome again to World Environment Day. We thought this was an ambitious, an opportune moment to launch this very well-written, very insightful, very up-to-date research report. So my day job is working with University College London's Centre for Climate Change and Sustainability Education. But I'm also here representing the National Association for Environmental Education, which for over 50 years has been supporting teachers throughout the UK to teach better, more effectively about environment and sustainability issues. So a couple of years ago, the trustees of the National Association for Environmental Education decided that we saw that Ofsted, the inspection organisation for schools and other education institutions in England, had been producing research reviews for many of the curriculum subjects, English, maths, religious education, and so on. But we knew that they wouldn't do a review of the research on environmental education, because environmental education is not a subject in the national curriculum. But we also knew that many teachers report about the environment and sustainability in a whole range of subjects. And we knew that there was a niche, there was a need for teachers, school leaders, governors, to have a source of up-to-date information about the research into environment and sustainability. And it seemed obvious to us that that review should look at interdisciplinary areas, including climate change education, and we wanted to give people a sense of what might be termed best practice in terms of environment, climate change, sustainability education. And so we commissioned Isabel and Bill to review the research and to write a report with some recommendations, to draw on some exemplar case studies from across the United Kingdom. And we now are proud to present that report, which is freely available on the NAEE website, and we commend it to you. And I just want to end by thanking Isabel and Bill for all their hard work above and beyond the call of duty, and the people who advised them. We had a little steering committee who helped as well. And so we're extremely proud of this report, and we commend it to you. And at which point I'm going to hand over to Bill, who's just put the link to the review into the chat. So thank you. Over to you.
And just to say, I've put the link in the chat so people can download that and follow along. And yes, Isabel, carry on with the report methodology and findings.
Yeah, so thanks everybody for joining. As Justin said, he's explained a bit more about the rationale for the report. And so Bill and I went away and sort of got stuck into diving into the evidence. And we had a sort of limited time for this review, but we sort of took a sort of deep dive into the literature, both academic and grey. So looking at sort of key research databases, as well as sort of looking at suggestions that we were sent sort of for evidence from different sort of NGOs or think tanks, just to see kind of what rigorous evidence we could find about what makes environmental, climate and sustainability education most effective. And yeah, so both of us took a look at all the papers and kind of tried to see where we could find some really robust evidence. And yeah, we were taking this as our sort of overall definition of climate, environmental and sustainability education. So we were defining it as a process that helps individuals, communities and organisations to learn about, in and for the environment, including the development of knowledge and skills necessary to sustain, protect and improve the natural world. So quite a broad, but we wanted to keep it deliberately fairly broad because obviously there are different words, these terms often overlap. And so we wanted to make sure we were covering all bases with our search. And I'm just going to give you now a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of our main findings. So in terms of effective practices for teachers, one of the first findings, which may not surprise many of you who are teaching at the moment, is the importance of kind of utilising community and outdoor learning opportunities. So things like field trips, nature connection activities, and partnerships with local organisations to make sure that environmental education is really grounded in the natural world, which, as we know, has lots of different educational outcomes, which can really improve students' mental and physical well-being. And these were just a few of the sort of some of the papers there, which there's more details about it in the report that we were drawing from. And as we know, nature connection is so essential in terms of helping young people to sort of feel that sense of belonging in nature and that sense of wanting to protect it. And as we know, it also has great implications for improving well-being and mental health, and can also help improve attention and cognition, as well as helping to combat eco-grief, which obviously a lot of young people are struggling with today. And we had some case studies which we included in the report, and one of these was the pollination case study. I don't know, Bill, do you want to say more about this, or I can say more about it?
Well, one thing I'll say about the case studies is that we try to very deliberately look for programs that cut across the nations of the UK, as well as address different ages and subjects of study. And so, yes, that's kind of more of the context of it. But yeah, feel free to go.
I can say more about the actual case study.
About the individual case studies. Yeah.
Yeah. So pollination in Scotland is a programme that was carried out by researchers at the University of Stirling with over 250 primary and secondary schools across the UK. And in Scotland, what they were doing was helping young pupils to engage with sort of almost citizen science or sort of biodiversity studies of insects and pollinators, and looking at sort of how that sort of shifted their attitude towards nature. And they found in an ethnographic study of 12 Scottish schools that this really sort of gave young people such a sort of transformative experience that really sort of made them feel like they were stewards of the environment, and really helped make them feel sort of connected to their school grounds, and really sort of led to some quite big changes in the way that young people saw themselves and also the way the school operated as well. So good case study to learn from there. A second finding that we had was that it's really important to engage with international case studies and cultural perspectives because of the fact that, you know, the environmental and sustainability and climate situation we find ourselves in now, it's a very interconnected issue, and it's important to understand how our actions in one part of the world might sort of have implications for other parts of the world. And it was also, we found some evidence here and some literature that really suggested that's really beneficial for students themselves as well, in terms of sort of helping feel like they have that global perspective. And so there was this particular study actually done with teachers in Northern Ireland, which was about sort of developing this course around critical global citizenship education, which meant sort of taking a sort of really anti-colonial stance to sort of understanding the current sort of climate crisis. And they found that that really sort of helped taking that. Oh, where's my screen gone? Can you still see the slides? Have they gone?
Yeah, yes, can still see them.
I actually can't see them anymore, but hopefully they'll come back in a minute. Oh, here they are. Yeah, the study really found that it sort of actually really helped young people between the age of 8 to 9 and 12 to 13 to understand and empathise with other parts of the world. So there is a real strength, I think, in bringing in that kind of specifically anti-colonial perspective to your teaching. Thirdly, we also found, and this is an interesting one because it has been a bit controversial in previous sort of debates around climate sustainability and environmental education, is we found the literature some real evidence that would support the case for making sure that this is a cross-curricular entity. So rather than kind of keeping environmental education really sort of siloed within specific classes, we found evidence that really there's real support, particularly amongst teachers actually, for making sure that this is a cross-curricular engagement. And because of the fact that it is such a holistic issue, we found that there was this research done by Dunlop and Rushton, which found that, you know, teachers really sort of supported that idea of kind of integrating the subject across the curriculum. And this is actually another case study which I can talk about, which is the Eco Capabilities project. And this one was actually involved researchers from UCL who worked with an arts and wellbeing charity called Cambridge Curiosity and Imagination, and 2 primary schools in deprived areas of East Anglia. And they created this really exciting course that involved 8 creative adventuring days, where researchers, teachers, and the project partner led 120 children aged 7 to 10 years old through outdoor activities combined with art exercises. And this involved, for example, drawing their happy place or engaging in other kind of activities like that. And they found that this really had a huge sort of beneficial effect in terms of young people really feeling that growing in confidence, also self-esteem, and also gaining a sense of environmental agency. And this sort of process, which they describe as artscaping, has now been further explored by UCL in a branching out project. And it led to a policy briefing written by the researchers who said that all primary age children should participate in 1 session of arts and nature activities per week in order to support their mental health and well-being, help to connect them to nature, and to positively impact their broader engagement with learning in school. So yeah, just a bit of a sense there of how all subjects can sort of be relevant and sort of gain in strength from this integration of a focus on the environment. And then fourthly, we found some evidence that, you know, and this again probably won't surprise you if you're a teacher, is that, you know, providing hands-on activities and real-world problem-solving engagement with local sustainability issues, as well as supporting young people in their political participation, is another way that you can really strengthen your sort of teaching or the delivery of this subject. So we found some evidence that, you know, immersive environmental education curricula really helps to nurture resilience and environmental stewardship behaviours. We also found evidence that sort of engaging in collaborative project-based learning really helps young people to feel sort of enhanced in their sort of sense of scientific and environmental agency. We also found some research which showed that teachers' perspectives are that, you know, climate change education should be much more action oriented, and we know that there's obviously a real sort of desire for that from young people and from teachers. But, you know, as a lot of the sort of at the moment, a lot of climate education seems to be very focused on private sphere actions, so individual actions we can all take. But of course, it's actually much more of a public issue that requires sort of lots of us engaging in action together outside of our own private spheres. So that was very much sort of brought up in the literature, and there was a paper by Dunlop here that talks a lot about the regimes of obstruction within schools that sort of halt that from happening in the way that many teachers and pupils would like it to. And we also found that lots of research as well that was supporting the importance of field trips, which again, we know in the current climate is becoming much more difficult sometimes to deliver these field trips for young people because of all the sort of issues of funding and time and that sort of thing. But the evidence was really strong that that should be supported. And then the fifth sort of takeaway was that alongside, which is very, very relevant specifically to what we've been doing here in Oxford this week with Right Here, Right Now, is the importance of addressing the social dimensions of environmental challenges, including issues of justice, equity, and power dynamics, to empower students to design equitable solutions. This came across really strongly in the literature and really links to what we've been talking about today at the academic event for Right Here, Right Now. And I should add, actually, if any of you are interested, that we do have some educational resources which we're putting together based on the sort of content that's been being delivered today by academics from across the world leading in this area. And if you haven't signed up for that already, then please do get in touch, because we'd be very happy to share them with you. But yes, we found in the academic literature that there's a lot of a sort of focus on the importance of sort of really getting to the root cause of why we're in the situation we're in, and actually young people really responding really, really well to kind of the ability to kind of think about power dynamics and how that's actually driving resource extraction. And there's this particular project called Water for All, which is an 18th month project in Glasgow with 10-year-old students. And this involves students kind of engaging in a really sort of in-depth analysis of why clean water access is not as available as it should be in places like Malawi and Zambia. And it ended with this showcase where parents and guests were able to see this climate justice tree where children had pledged to sort of engage in various actions towards climate justice, and also a climate just wall with raindrops sort of exploring justice and these sort of topics. So yeah, I think there is evidence out there, and there are studies that have been done which really sort of are we could replicate those in other contexts for the benefit of this field. And then we also found evidence about the importance of linking environmental education with STEM subjects. So not just for green career pathways, but also just in general for sort of enhancing these subjects. So particularly there was this paper I've just pulled out here, which was about developing this Heat Cool initiative learning tool, where young people, 103 students in 5 UK primary schools and secondary schools, got to use this heat detection technology that sort of enabled students to witness the transfer of heat from different objects to one another. And they found that from that study that was a really sort of beneficial experience for the young people involved, and really helped improve motivation and engagement, as well as climate literacy. And there's another case study here which I'd like to share, which is UNCO2, which is from Wales. And this takes quite a different approach, actually, because it is also was quite an arts-based project, but it also utilised technology and interactive narratives to explore concepts related to climate change with students in Key Stage 3. So researchers from Swansea University and Bournemouth University worked with 2 secondary schools in Wales to develop a series of workshops covering carbon footprints of everyday activities. They used a model where STEM activities are combined with the arts, and students participated in a sort of web-based interactive digital narrative developed by the researchers. It was a storytelling exercise which was set on a lunar colony and presented learners with a series of text prompts where they could make certain decisions about food and travel based on the considerations such as resource limitations and collective interests. And then students also then worked to kind of create interactive digital narratives based on that experience. And they found that directly as a result of this project, there was a real positive attitude from the students involved towards carbon footprint reduction. And also that really sort of linked well with some of the new developments in the Welsh curriculum and sort of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So again, another really nice study that has some really rigorous evidence of the Environmental Education Initiative engaged in having a direct effect on the students' behaviour and knowledge. Another sort of key takeaway we found from the research was that cultivating partnerships with environmental charities, conservation agencies, outdoor learning centres, and sustainability-focused businesses can really help to enhance expertise, resources, and the local context. And the literature had lots of examples of this, one of which was the Green Spaces Learning Places project in London, Greater London, which had a real sort of really sort of has a strength there in bringing young people together with organisations in London focused on helping people have more access to green space. And they found, again, from surveying participants, that it had a real positive influence on confidence, nature connection, well-being, and involvement in green outdoor environments. And lastly, because I feel like I've been talking a lot, everybody, and I want to make sure there's time for discussion, we also found that adopting whole school approaches to sustainability and utilising resources to support school climate action really built into the curriculum and school operations is another really growing area of robust research that really supports this approach. So, for example, eco schools is one form of that, but also forest schools. There's, I mean, it's very much a growing area of literature, but there is some sort of more research coming out that shows that this can really have a lot of strengths in terms of meeting young people's different learning needs and sort of helping young people with different learning styles engage in the subject. And we also included a case study here of eco schools in Northern Ireland, which is, it says in 1994, I mean, it's a sort of global project, but within Northern Ireland itself, it's been particularly successful. And the first green flag in the school was awarded in 1994. By 2015, Northern Ireland has now got 1,152 schools actively participating in eco schools, and so really is sort of a real beacon actually in the eco schools movement, what's been happening in Northern Ireland. And there's been a lot going on to sort of engage in teacher training through Queen's University Belfast to sort of help provide the leadership as necessary to sort of expand the eco schools network within Northern Ireland. Yeah, and there's been lots of different sort of activities they've done, like power down days and litter reduction projects that have seen sort of 45% reduction in pupil littering and a saving of vast amounts of energy by these schools who participated. So yeah, lots of positive things there, which you can read more about in the report. And I mean, the report also does, of course, make the case that as much as there are these effective sort of techniques or particular approaches that teachers and educators can use, there's obviously a lot more that other people could be doing to better support teachers, because there are so many barriers that that are faced in terms of actually sort of making sure that these different sort of approaches can be engaged within. So the report does also address some of those barriers in terms of resources and time and support, and makes different recommendations to different groups who are involved in environmental education in the UK. So it makes a request that policymakers should really put more effort into developing these comprehensive national strategies that we need, setting clear targets and providing adequate funding that really coheres across the 4 nations of the UK. And we make the recommendation that cross-curricular integration and experiential learning should really be supported and become a core component of the national curriculum. We also make the request of leadership teams and governors and multi-academy trusts that they should really prioritise teacher training and professional development in the way that entities like the Deanery are doing, and really making sure that educators have access to the knowledge and the skills and confidence that they deserve to have in this area. And also drawing on some of the evidence about the importance of community partnerships, we sort of make the case that that should be further invested in. For teachers, of course, we would, hope that people will have the opportunity to engage in more professional development. And we also make the case that maybe there are some new exciting avenues in terms of utilising technology and media to sort of enhance teaching experiences and learning experiences for students. And we also make the case that for national and local environmental organisations, there's a need to really keep fostering those partnerships across the board to really support this learning. And for learners, of course, we also make the case that there's much that learners can do as well. I mean, we've been really lucky right here, right now, to have had so many students local to Oxford come and engage in the programme. It's been really, really amazing to see so many sort of enthusiastic young people who really want to come and learn and get more involved. And tomorrow, for anybody who is local to Oxford, we've got the museum late night, which Bill will be leading on, which is exciting. And there's going to be music and there's going to be arts, and it's going to be really great. And I'm sure lots of other young people will be there as well. So I think learners can do a lot as well in terms of joining in at these kind of events that are available. And lastly, of course, we make a request that there is, of course, I mean, we would say this being researchers, but there is genuinely a need for more research, because although there is this growing body of evidence, there is still a lot, as we found in this review, there's a lot of evidence that kind of is fairly anecdotal or sort of, will sort of make statements, but not necessarily have the sort of rigorous, robust data to back it up. So definitely we do need more research, especially long-term research that really sort of looks at how young people engaging in intervention at one particular time then leads to direct differences in behaviour or attitude later on down the line. There's a real need for research like that. And there's a lot of reasons that kind of more long-term research doesn't necessarily get funded. But yeah, if we could make that happen, that'd be really great. And there's much more we could do to collaborate as well to make sure that we can sort of develop these evidence-based curricula and resources that people need. So thank you for listening to me. I'm going to stop waffling now, but we've got this question. We just wanted to open up the room now to discussion, really, and just give people the chance to ask questions or to feed in your own thoughts and reflections on how we can all really work together to better support effective practice in the classroom. So yeah, maybe I don't know if there's any questions in the chat or how we do this bit, but.
Well, one thing in the chat that I noticed is that someone has noted that UNCO2 is still available as a resource and provided a link, which is really great. And there's also a number of publications that came out from that project, so you can kind of see the evidence base behind it, as well as the kind of the thinking of the people who designed it. And then I also put a link in to the more information about this right here, right now, Global Climate Summit. If people are interested, again, there are events. There's the museum late tonight, but there's also a number of other events happening tomorrow and over the weekend, some of which you can join wherever you are in the world, some of which you'd have to come into Oxford to really participate in. But yes, anyhow, I have not noticed many other comments other than we have some AI note takers in the chat.
Oh, do we?
But I was wondering, Justin, I was wondering if you had any reflections on this, because I feel like one aspect of this is that we've been working on this report while this has still been a very kind of dynamic space in terms of the curriculum review and change in government leadership in the UK. And so I guess, do you have thoughts about kind of where to take a report like this or to take ideas like this, given that this is a changing landscape?
Yeah, so thank you both for that. That was very, very clear and cogent. Yeah, and as Isabel said, one of the recommendations is directly aimed at policymakers, and it's become a very prescient report in that the new government commissioned this curriculum and assessment report, CAR, and we hope that the message is getting across to the panel that this review provides a key opportunity to meaningfully integrate sustainability and climate justice education throughout the national curriculum. And we and others are calling for the curriculum to be solutions-oriented, integrated across subjects rather than just siloed into geography and science. And that message, I hope, is coming across loud and clear, really. And the more people who can support that message and push it forward, the more chance we may have of moving forward, of coming up with a curriculum which really does take things seriously.
Yeah, I mean, is there more that at the moment that, I suppose, building on those recommendations, is there more that sort of NAEE is doing at the moment specifically? Any updates, particularly on what you're doing at the moment, that would be relevant to people listening?
Well, we can, as a small charity, we continue to support initiatives taken by teachers and other educators who have innovative projects, and we'll carry on doing that. The Centre for Climate Change and Sustainability Education at UCL is continuing to develop online modules to support teachers, because when you ask, as we have done, teachers what they need most, it's apart from curriculum change, it is support in terms of how to teach these subjects, these topics more effectively. And so what we've been doing, a whole team of people have been doing, is to produce these free online materials that give people an idea of how you might tweak your teaching in order to teach climate change and sustainability more effectively in a research-informed and engaged way.
That's great. Actually, Bill, I was just thinking that's another plug we could do from the deanery session last week. Sort of the resources that Travis and everybody made could be something useful we could share in the chat as well. There was a group of researchers involved in the Right Here, Right Now project. For those who didn't come to that webinar last week, they created these really amazing sort of pre-designed lessons around climate justice and attribution science, which could be quite a useful resource, perhaps. So we could share those in the chat as well.
Yes, exactly. Oh yeah, and Joe's actually done that.
Oh, already? Okay.
The link for it, which is brilliant.
Joe,
Yeah,
look at you, so quick.
One thing I noticed is that just as you were talking, Justin, about kind of some of those modules UCL is developing, there was this question about pre-service training and how much it includes some of these approaches that we're talking about and what universities are doing. And I guess the context of that is that if for a typical teacher, maybe they're not getting very much of this, and so it is this supplemental role that UCL is doing to add more resources. But I guess do you have a sense of the landscape of teacher training as it currently stands, in the four nations?
First of all, it's incredibly complex because there's so many different routes into teaching, probably more so in the UK than many other countries. You know that the content is highly regulated by the government. There are opportunities because obviously subjects are in science and geography, so we would expect teachers to be prepared for it. The problem in many cases is the fact there is so much content, so much pedagogy to be put and covered in a year or less. Any particular initiative you might have towards teaching about sustainability more effectively is just one of 100 different things you have to cover in a year. So we rely a lot on what's going on in school for people who are pre-service trainees to learn what's going on in school, to see what's happening. And of course, some schools are doing an enormous amount. Some schools are doing hardly anything. I see you've got there's a question in the chat saying thank you. This is from Kathy, who says some fantastic case studies. Thanks for sharing. All the recommendations hold importance. Were there specific elements that you feel were revealed as more important than others? Priorities of travel, for example?
That's an interesting reflection. I suppose some of the some of the areas there was more evidence than others. So I'd say there was more rigorous evidence, for example, about the importance of kind of hands-on practical sort of approaches, for example, because I think that's been being talked about for a bit longer. But then some of those more sort of current debates, for example, around the need to integrate sort of the subject as a cross-curricular entity, there's less kind of rigorous, robust evidence to show at this moment that is a great approach, because it just hasn't really been, particularly in the UK context, done that much yet. But I think, I would say that is kind of a bit of a priority, really. I'd say specifically, especially considering what's going on at the moment in terms of sort of thinking about the curriculum as a whole. Would you agree, Justin and Bill?
Yeah, I mean, something that I thought was interesting is that leading up to this webinar, we tried to figure out if there was a single recommendation that we really wanted to showcase as the headline. And in some ways, it was this kind of interdisciplinarity that we thought just captured lots of elements that are important, I think, historically in the field of environmental education, but also in terms of how we are now trying to prepare young people for a future shaped by climate change in a world where kind of the discourses of sustainability are particularly important, but you kind of need to have a critical approach to them if you're going to go into certain professions. And so that kind of breaking down the silos of school subjects, I think still feels like a really important one to bring in, even if, again, it's we don't have great examples of it happening in the current, particularly the English formal education system. But I think it still feels very relevant to kind of what we think of kind of the purpose of education can play in terms of preparing young people for a future shaped by climate change, a very uncertain future. So yeah, I think for me, that's what comes up, even though we talked about some of these other themes, which might lean more into, say, the justice framing or the kind of the human rights framing as a result of this summit.
And indeed, what we know from the surveys, the UCL survey and of teachers and the Howard Jones et al. Survey, is that even though it's actually the topics are really covered in science, from, all the way through, which is compulsory all the way through to age 16, and geography compulsory all the way through to age 14. Lots and lots of teachers from many different subjects are covering these topics: English, RE, maths, and so on, which shows that it can be done. It shows that people can teach about these subjects in the curriculum, and what they need is support and encouragement. And there are lots of teachers who probably feel that they may not get the support, and so anything teacher leaders can do to support those staff who want to do more is for them the door may be open. I think there was another question on the
Can I just say one more thing about these sort of areas of priority as well? I've just been thinking in the background, because I think I think I personally feel that some of the parts of the report, for example, we talk about the need to really sort of help young people to be able to analyze power dynamics and sort of think critically about power and sort of the political economy of the world. I think that part for me feels very, very crucial because, as we've been talking about at the Right Here, Right Now conference this week, really we're sort of getting at the root of what's really causing the issue that we're all facing now. And I think the more papers, there wasn't as many papers, again, that really had trialed that approach to teaching and sort of done it in a rigorous long-term way and showed how that sort of enhance young people's learning outcomes. So I think more research in that area, more sort of focus on that could be really important, especially in the sort of political context of the UK and everything that's going on in the world right now. I think that's really important. And I think the point we make in the report as well about helping or supporting teachers to support young people's political agency as well. So not just helping them understand power dynamics and why the climate crisis has come to be the crisis that it is today and why it's affecting some people, not other people, to a greater extent. I think also we make the case in the report, the young people's political agency and sort of being able to help them channel that into sort of action, active action, which I know is a controversial sort of viewpoint perhaps to some people, but it's something that I think from my conversations with Bill and Justin, we would support that. And I think the literature supports that as well in terms of helping young people to feel that they have hope and that they have that they're not hopeless, that they do have power and they can make change. I think those two things are probably the kind of priorities for me personally, but I don't want to speak for Justin and Bill and say that that's their priorities too. But yeah.
Question from Sue Wei in the chat. Thanks for sharing. It says, I'm curious about the non-formal, informal education part regarding education for sustainable development, especially for climate change education. How can we better engage people within community? And I'm talking to you from Poland, actually from Warsaw, at a conference for museums and science centres and botanic gardens and aquariums. And sustainability over the last 2.5 days has been a key topic that throughout the world, from Canada, South, Chile, across to the Far East and Australasia, and almost everywhere there are examples of museums and science centres shifting their content of their programs away from maybe the physical sciences more towards sustainability and biodiversity loss, food security, and so on. And the advantage I think they have is they can work in multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary ways that schools sometimes find more challenging. The difficulty, of course, they face is the length of time they can engage people with is far shorter than schools. Schools can work with people for 4, 5, 6 years, depending on the sector. So there is extremely good examples, many of which are available online, of programs that people are carrying out to try and engage people in this way forward. And one example, this is sort of not from the non-formal sector. We were at a session this afternoon with the UK, with the English Natural Education Nature Park, which is a way of using technology to sort of share information about what schools are doing, but that has been replicated in the out of school sector as well. The use people collecting information about what they're doing, putting onto a database, sharing around the world, and so people can collaborate and see what's happening. So there are, compared to 10 years ago, some fantastic examples of the sort of projects that are pushing boundaries, I think.
Yeah, that's really interesting to kind of, again, think of that, the inside, outside the classroom, informal, non-formal distinctions and opportunities. There's so many questions coming in and people sharing information in the chat. So it's really nice to see that. Again, there's that moment in a webinar where you wonder if anyone has a question. And now there's like so many, too many probably for us to even get to in the next 20 minutes. One that actually is towards the bottom of the questions, but jumped out at me is actually really thinking of this more as a research question, as education researchers and particularly kind of environmental education researchers, sustainability education researchers, and climate education researchers. I'll just read the question. Do you think there should be any assessment methods for sustainability education? Personally, it maybe is more relevant to learners' competencies rather than knowledge input. Balance between competencies and knowledge may be considered. I think there's this question again, evaluating an assessment in education, but also as researchers trying to figure out the impact of educational intervention, understanding what's happening. And I think there's I find it very interesting in terms of knowledge-based measures of learning. Sometimes you get then in environmental education lots of interest in behaviors, pro-environmental behaviors, and kind of how you might measure that through a questionnaire. It always feels like it's kind of trying to get at something that's hard to pin down, and often the simple question doesn't really capture the full idea, especially since pro-environmental behaviors tend to be so individual as opposed to collective. And then you get into kind of more of these broader concepts around competencies, capabilities, which are really fascinating theoretically, but then still difficult to really measure in some ways as a package, as a bundle of things. So I guess kind of find this researchy question quite interesting. I'd say from my own experience, the thing that I've enjoyed the most is doing more creative methods with young people that themselves are types of educational interventions, as in they're a learning opportunity, a skill development opportunity, but they're also a data collection opportunity for me, working with young people to do something creative that becomes the data in a research project. An example of that is a digital storytelling project that I've had with a few different groups of young people in the UK, secondary school students generally, and where they write a letter from the future, so kind of time travel to the year 2050, write a letter from their future self to their present self. And by doing that, kind of engage with future scenarios, with kind of thinking about their own life course, thinking about their own influences, how they might learn, what they might have learned. And so it's very rich, that, and you can only do it with so many people at a time. So it's not the same as having a questionnaire that goes out to 1,000 people, but there's something to that as well. Anyhow, I don't know that as two other education researchers, I'm curious if you have thoughts about kind of both this idea of assessing the impact of these things, as well as researchers, how we kind of do rigorous research in this space.
Isabel, what do you think?
That's a big question. I think in terms of how we do rigorous research in this space, I think, yeah, that is a challenge, to sort of make sure that we're sort of collecting data in the most, I mean, I think, yeah, long-term, more participatory type studies are obviously going to be beneficial, really, because I think the shorter term the study is, and a lot of the evidence out there is quite sort of short term. It is kind of, oh, we did this intervention and then we did this questionnaire, and this is what and that is helpful, of course, in kind of getting an initial snapshot of kind of how effective a particular intervention might be. But there is just so little long-term kind of rigorous studies going on. But Bill and I have been doing some work to sort of do some sort of summaries of research and evidence. And actually, there was one the other day that for I should say, sorry, for the North American Association of Environmental Education, sort of spin-off organization of NAEE. And I was looking at a paper the other day about this thing called the Sonship program, that was a sort of initial environmental education project that was, I think it was carried out in the 2000s, but I can share the paper in the link in a minute when I found it, in the chat, sorry, in a minute when I found it. But this paper was one of the few sort of more long-term studies I found, which had a sort of a control group and also and the main group of people who'd been through that intervention, and it sort of showed in the long term that the project really did have sort of long-lasting ripple effects in terms of how those people then went on to choose where they lived and what jobs they did and that sort of thing. So yeah, I'll share that paper in the chat when I just found the link. But definitely think, yeah, we need those long-term and sort of more in-depth studies, I would say.
That's just a nice question in the chat. Is from Claire Gilbert, is there a challenge with the limitations on teachers on expressing political views? I'm not sure. I mean, some of that might have been captured in the review. I mean, from my experience, there is some teachers are wary of expressing their own opinions because they fear that they may be interpreted as pushing a particular political point of view. We know from the Howard Jones et al. Survey that many teachers are pro an action-oriented curriculum, and many teachers are in favour of young children getting involved in peaceful political action, such as writing to the members of parliament or engaging even in school strikes. But there are many teachers who feel that it's a very they're on very thin ice if they start talking about and promoting particular points of view. And the government's been very clear, the Department for Education has been very clear that these are political issues, and that some schools have to work within the government framework in discussing issues such as sustainability and climate change. And which is why when you look in the curriculum, you get a lot of the facts about climate change, but you don't often get a lot of information in the curriculum about what are the causes. And what the politics is behind climate change and sustainability and climate justice, and that I think is a problem. And because it's not there, it does limit teachers in what they can say and do.
It's at the launch event for the Right Here Right Now summit yesterday evening. We had Vanessa Nakate, youth climate striker from Uganda, who's become one of the big figures in the youth movement, Fridays for Future. And again, I find that moment in time really interesting, when schools were the front lines of a new wave of youth climate activism, and I think that's what led to. I mean, there's a politics of climate education in the U.S., which maybe we put aside because that's a whole other webinar, and there's the politics of climate education in the UK, and I think the strikes really brought that to the front, where you might actually have quite supportive teachers, school leaders who are kind of willing to say, you know, we are happy for you to go participate in this as long as you're keeping up with your studies. And then there are other schools where it actually felt like this was quite not a constructive way for young people to engage with the issue. And when kind of with Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil, kind of the activism that became, at least the way the media presented the activism, it became a much more of a divisive political issue, that they felt like, again, to talk about climate change might be talking about it to encourage climate action might be perceived as encouraging climate activism. And I think that's a really important distinction that people need to be able to make, while also recognizing that activism is really important. I mean, I think the reason people like Vanessa Nakate did what they did is because they felt like the education system wasn't supporting them, and also the political system, the economic system, because they were actually, seeing quite clearly some of these questions that Isabel mentioned earlier in terms of power and a kind of more often even kind of legacies of again, economic models, political models that have led to the climate crisis. I saw another something related to this idea of kind of climate change and net zero games, letters to the future, and how it might actually have a negative consequence in terms of eco-anxiety, and that's leading to another research project, which sounds super interesting to me. And maybe again, because this is my own area, I'm particularly interested in it. I've done a lot of stuff on kind of climate hope, pedagogies of hope. I think the Kathy Jerome might be a collaborator on that, might be on this call as well. And so for me, this is a really interesting question, which is like, how can you constructively engage with climate change while generating hope, and hope being itself a concept to kind of unpack in different ways. But in this case, I kind of lean on Maria Oyala's work in environmental education and hope, and she kind of breaks down the components of climate hope when she uses these kind of questionnaires to try and assess it. And it's elements of it include kind of trust in self in terms of kind of sustainability competencies, trust in others because it's a collective problem, and then positive reappraisal. And this idea of there's something that you have a kind of a negative feeling about, but then somehow you're able to engage with it constructively, reappraise it, and then get past that maybe more negative to a more positive engagement with it. And I found that in the letters from the future, maybe it doesn't always happen that way, but I found that there were definitely young people who the kind of just to kind of with others look at this worry that they have about the future and try to figure out how they might navigate it in that kind of futures literacy type way, didn't necessarily lead to more paralysis. It kind of made them feel like they had other friends thinking about the same things, and that they kind of, were kind of being creative about it and kind of telling stories and being heard. And so but obviously we have to kind of really be careful about in an age appropriate way, and also kind of acknowledging the kind of different life experiences of different learners, how we engage with these tricky concepts. We have to really create a constructive environment however we can. At the same time that there's all of the other constraints on teachers in terms of limited time and resource and everything else.
There's a interesting question about physics, I think. And are there any examples have you come across any examples? Ilya Sholin writes, interesting projects that integrate environmental education into the study of physics. It's interesting, in our report, the word physics doesn't appear. Once, chemistry appears once, biology appears 5 times, and I think it's symptomatic that environmental education has tended to have the research has pointed out, that the major focus of sustainability and climate change education has tended to be in the sort of biology area. But there are many examples where people have integrated physics into sustainability education and vice versa. And I think that is will continue to grow, because there are, without good understanding of physics, you can't understand climate change and sustainability. And the other thing worth pointing out, I think, is that sustainability isn't one thing. It's a whole range of different dimensions that we label under the umbrella sustainability, but there's a whole range of aspects of sustainability that can be addressed throughout the curriculum, as we said before.
I just found an interesting question here as well from Amelia about, she says, sort of building off my thoughts about helping students and children understand power and feel empowered. Did I find any work that reflected on the admission of children from the planning and design of the environmental education projects that are led by adults, that actively involved in productive and not performative ways children, so as to include their voice and thoughts when designing projects around environmental education? I think that's a really very strong point there, Amelia. And I have to say that didn't come through in the literature. I have to say, like, actually the importance of young people being part of the design project process of the actual educational initiative. It could be that there's research out there that our searcher didn't find, because we were sort of specifically using the keywords like effective and environmental education UK. Maybe there is evidence. I think actually, I know, Amelia, that your work is, I believe, in this area, looking at participatory design of environmental education in the Galapagos, I think. But yeah, so maybe you would have more sort of research to share there, but that didn't actually come through strongly in the literature at all, which I think is a real sort of a gap again, or something that we should look to sort of try to address, because be a fruitful area for research, I think.
I don't think we covered Shannon's question, did we, from earlier, by Shannon O'Connor? Has research been based on mainstream schools? Was there any evidence found for SEN, special education needs, or ALN, additional learning needs settings? There's some, hasn't there?
There was a bit that came through, but again, I would say that was not something. It was more sort of discussed in the sections around like forest school, or like we found there was more evidence there talking about outdoor learning and sort of how that can be beneficial for young people with different needs. But it didn't really. I think there's a real gap there in terms of sort of thinking about how that's a relevant question to other aspects of environmental and climate sustainability education. Like, how does, for example, I didn't find any evidence about sort of how young people with different needs might be considered in a whole school approach to sustainability and environmental education. So I think, again, there are these like pockets of research, but then where those things join up is kind of missing often.
And that was a gap when we did a review of the research about 15 years ago, which was funded by a whole range of organisations, and it's still a gap now, I think. I mean, there are some examples where people have focused on kids with behavioural needs, particularly with behavioural needs, and how working in the outdoors, often giving them access to fire and knives and axes and things, has had a hugely beneficial impact on their on the kids, not just their cognitive, but the affective side as well, and raise their self-esteem. So it's given them a chance to get away from the restricting elements of formal schooling and give them a chance to shine at something that perhaps they wouldn't normally have thought would be an avenue for them.
One thing that I was thinking about coming back to was this question of the kind of difficulty of actually doing interdisciplinary teaching in the English school system and the barriers to it that someone had put in the chat earlier. And I think when I've done some interviews with teachers over the years, sometimes there's just really simple things that can happen, which is that you just have a chat with a teacher in another subject that you might get along with, and that you might have a shared interest in, something like sustainability, and they can bring a bit of art to your science, and you can bring a bit of science to their art, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a very comprehensive approach to interdisciplinary teaching, but it can be kind of a light touch way of doing it or experimenting with it, and that might also be something that can happen a bit outside of the classroom, but still in the school, whether it is an eco club where you're trying to, again, bring in different subjects, different learning opportunities, different experiences. I think there can be opportunities to do that. In fact, actually, one of the people who was in Oxford for our summit, just happened to be in Europe and was able to join us, was from the charity that runs the Eco Schools program in South Africa, which also runs Young Reporters for the Environment, another one of the Foundation for Environmental Education programs. We mentioned Eco Schools as this. In England, it's Keep Britain Tidy, and it's the kind of various Keep It Beautiful, Keep It Tidy equivalents around the UK. But the kind of Young Reporters, I think, is really brilliant because it's young people out there. They're kind of telling the stories of climate, sustainability, environmental issues. They're developing those communication skills. Their voices are being heard. And that cuts across disciplines, that cuts across subjects in a really interesting way. And again, it's empowering. But I don't know, we're actually running out of time, which is what I'm realizing. So I wonder if we should each do kind of a bit of a wrap-up voice or a wrap-up reflection, unless there's anything else we saw in the chat that we really wanted to address.
Well, I was going to leave the final words to you, but I just wanted to thank everybody for their comments and the links and the resources they've put in. There's some wonderful stuff there, really. Just to say that if you want to contact any of us, you can easily find our emails. We might have time to put them in the chat, probably. Just if you want to contact us, please do. It is a pleasure to host it, well, to take part in this webinar, and I'm happy to say that I can declare engaging the next generation, the state of environmental sustainability and climate education in UK schools and effective practice in the classroom officially launched. Thank you, Isabel and Bill.
Well, and thank you, Justin, for commissioning it in the first place. Isabel, do you have any final thoughts as we sign off?
Yeah, no, I just feel really grateful and really pleased to have had so many of you come today and to have shared so many interesting thoughts and to have sort of really joined in the discussion. It really feels like such a great community that we have in terms of people who are really passionate about environmental, climate, sustainability education and really wanting to make a sort of a difference and sort of really sort of further this field. So yeah, it's just really nice to connect with more of you, and hopefully this won't be the last opportunity, and maybe we'll have some more events coming soon. But yeah, feel free to get in touch at any point with any questions or anything by email whenever you like. And yeah, thanks to Joe for facilitating this as well.
Oh, you're very welcome. And thank you all for joining. I just wanted to take a moment to just share a couple of plugs. One in particular is that please do give us a sense of what you thought of the webinar today. Take just a couple of minutes to fill out our feedback form. I've just put a link in the chat. We also do have, please do also visit our site. I'll put the link in just a moment. We have some online learning there, which is available. And of course, you can access our Knowledge Hub, which includes breakdowns of department research for applied use in practice and in policy, our podcast series and resource packs, which of course includes the lessons that Bill and Isabel referenced as well. I also want to include a plug for an upcoming webinar, which is about whether access to nature supports mental health and well-being in secondary schools and examining the evidence with honorary Norham Fellow Kim Polgreen meeting with other speakers. So do join us for that if available. But I just want to, again, thank you all for joining.